Okay, everybody, welcome back to In Progress. This is our weekly roundtable discussion of the political stories and issues and ideas that are top of mind for progressive folks across the Lone Star State this week. My name is Chris Mosier. I am the communications director here at Progress, Texas. Welcome if you're hearing us on KPFT FM 90.1, Houston, Texas. Progress, Texas amplifies progressive leaders, values, and actions. And we operate a major digital network, too. It includes social media, podcasts, legacy media contributions, and more. We reach millions of people all across Texas every month. This week, joined by Executive Director Kathleen Thompson. Hi, KT.
Hey, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
We got, or whatever might be the case. We also have a digital manager, Haley Smith.
That's right. Hello. Howdy.
And let's see if I can get this right. We also have advocacy and development coordinator, Tatum Owens.
Without a doubt. You got it right there.
Welcome back, Tatum.
Plenty of practice.
Yes.
So we're going to swing back around. Tatum, of course, will take part in our discussion today, but we're going to swing back around to put the spotlight on her because she just got back from a trip to Europe, which is really, really interesting. And as you know, Texans love to hear about what other people think of Texans. Everybody's heard the idea that when you travel abroad, someone might, in some far-flung place, learn that you're an American and maybe turn their nose up at you. But when they learn that you're a Texan, suddenly they want to talk about it.
Really intrigued all of a sudden. Yeah.
So we're definitely interested to hear about that. Also, you may have heard me, if you're listening on KPFT on Thursday, you may have heard me briefly on the morning show with Marlo this morning. Marlo Blue is filling in on the morning show, and she had a really great topic about where the left and the right can meet in this fraught and, divided, intentionally divided sort of environment that we're in right now. Where are those places and how do we exploit them? And so we'll get back around to that as well. But of course, for now, the big topic is the end of silly season, as we call it. Silly season is a term that Democrats use for when we pick on each other during a primary, nomination process. And so everybody, I think, is glad to have that behind us. The general election phase for the 2026 midterm is officially underway. The battle lines are now clearly drawn. The battle is looking epic. I think let's start with Tatum, since she's been away for a little while and hopefully has managed to catch back up to reality after her trip a little bit. Let's talk about the big Paxton win over John Cornyn. I think we all saw it coming, but now that it's here, how does it feel?
Can I just say it was really strange? I was out from the 18th to the 26th. So the first day of early voting to election day. And so,
Wow.
and at that, I was exhausted when I got back and election results were coming in. And the first thing that I saw on my phone at my local trivia show was Ken Paxton won. And I was immediately transported back to this conversation with the round table of Politico friends that I have, some campaigners, some lobbyists, and we were all talking months ago about what does it mean if Paxton takes it versus Cornyn. And I think everybody agreed we want it to be Paxton, but dear God, help us. Dear God, help us if he takes it in the end. It's I think it will be a better campaign for Talarico to make the distinction that he is the change candidate this election season, where everybody has a low favorability of the Trump administration downward, and Ken Paxton is the MAGA candidate in this election. We know that he is the dog, the attack dog for trans issues, for any MAGA battle that you can see. He has done that from the Attorney General's office. So it'll be a very it's already been an interesting election twist for him taking the ticket come November, and a new term such as Talafreakoes being donned on Talarico merch.
That is some low-hanging fruit.
Right?
Fruit, I gotta say.
Just come on. Like, obviously people are going to wear that.
Yeah.
But I look forward to other just mistakes, truly, that Paxton will say, rhetorical mistakes that will get turned in Talarico's favor, because this was a fun one, talking about how Talarico is going to outraise him because he's so good at raising money. Why would you highlight that as a candidate? I don't know.
I think with Ken Paxton being clearly the worst candidate in a general election with how much baggage he has, it makes the Trump endorsement so interesting to me, and all of the voting afterwards. I mean, I don't want this seems kind of nightmarish, but I just for a second want to be in the mind of a Republican primary voter. Do you know what I mean? What do they think the general election is going to play out as? I want to know the internal understanding of politics from a GOP voter. Does that make sense?
Sure.
We'll get to this later. We have so much more in common than we do that separates us, but I want to know what they're thinking, because I mean, clearly Ken Paxton cannot be this is our guy. Like, I just can't imagine.
Not the unity candidate. Yeah, exactly.
Yesterday, Trump said at his cabinet bootlicking meeting where all of his cabinet members have to talk about, oh, you're just the best, you're the best and the most handsome and the tallest and the thinnest
And you smell so good,
the least orange, and your hair and
your shoes totally fit.
So after the groveling bootlicking happened, Trump said, I don't care about the midterms. And I just think that it shows with the Ken Paxton endorsement.
Yeah.
So Ken Paxton and John Cornyn have spent more than $100 million attacking each other for months. There was a very late endorsement from Trump. And I think that Republican senators are groaning nationwide, and the National Republican Senatorial, fundraising committee is quickly scrubbing their hits of Ken Paxton in real time as the results come through. And I think that the choice of Ken Paxton just shows how far gone the Texas Republican Party is. It doesn't really exist anymore. And it's really the Trump party, and whatever he says goes. So I think that the choice of Paxton for the reasonable Republicans that exist, and the independents, and the young voters, and the progressives and the Democrats, it does make it a little bit easier for James Talarico and for people who are sick and tired of the chaos and the corruption and multi-million dollars for a reflecting pool and $1 billion for a ballroom that none of us are ever going to be in, when you can't afford your groceries and your gas.
Right.
And it's summer travel season. You can't afford to go from Dallas to Fort Worth. So where are you going to go? So I think that the pick of Paxton over Cornyn really does put in stark contrast how different the candidates are going to be and what the priorities are going to be. And if you want more of the same in 2027 and beyond.
So JD Vance was before the White House press pool recently, and he basically laughed off a reporter's question about corruption. This whole well-presented question about, here's the history of corruption that Trump has participated in, and JD Vance is just your question is stupid. I don't like the question, which that does track, but it does kind of bring me back to top down, down to our state, where is this totally different environment. You're not talking about presidential politics, but corruption is still very much the commonplace accepted thing within our Republican Party. And it makes me think about how the argument that Talarico has to make is very different than what Paxton does.
Sure.
To the different targeted groups of people, right? If you're just going to vote for whoever is on the Republican ballot, no values, no really anything to consider. It's just the party name versus the Democratic or even independent voters who are going to show up to the polls with a lot of different issues on their minds. It's just very different races, truly.
For sure. I was listening to, I do listen to outside podcasts occasionally, and I was listening to one that Scott Braddock showed up on a couple of days ago, and he talked about how, by his reckoning, going back to the Monica Lewinsky scandal, was a point where a great big swath of the American electorate, really on a bipartisan sort of level, has adjusted their minds to this idea that all politicians are philandering, corrupt, scoundrels. And the fact that one is so more publicly than others doesn't obviate the idea that they're all horrible, vile scum. And so to me, that, and to Scott Braddock, what he said was that that levels the playing field for actual scoundrels like we have in Ken Paxton, for sure. And so it's an unfortunate part of the landscape in the way that the media has impacted our politics. And of course, the way that people all the way back to Karl Rove were weaponizing our politics in certain ways to kind of desensitize the American public to things that they should care about. But that point is true. And to Tatum's point as well, there are kind of two different goals here. James Talarico can go on and on. We have reams and documents and entire, files full of things that we could bag on Ken Paxton for doing, either in his personal life or in his professional life, that are far outside the bounds of commonly held ethics. However, there is a great big bunch of the voters out there who have stopped caring about that.
Yeah.
And so one wonders, everybody's heard of Ken Paxton either for good or for ill. To me, it seems like James Talarico's primary job at this point is to introduce himself, to reintroduce himself to people out there who have not been paying attention to politics. We got to remember this is the broad, wide swath of Texas, a great many of whom are simply tuned completely out. And so when it comes time to vote, if they even show up in November, it's time for Talarico to show all those people what a cool dude he is. The guy that we all know and love in James Talarico. Personally, I'm going to speak for the group here. But a lot of people just don't know who he is yet.
I think they're definitely fighting for that. And it's been interesting how Trump, Paxton, and alike have given him name recognition too. Like Trump has made Talarico a talking point for the Republican Party. And I'll add further to that. You talked about how the normalization of corruption in our politics, going back to like the Gilded Age, that it's where it's so commonplace.
Sure.
It's just disturbing. Makes it easier for other candidates to come in and be scoundrels as well. By the way, I love scoundrel, old timey word right there, and it is very to crooked Ken. Thank you, John Cornyn, for that name and that name only. That is the one thing I'll thank him for. I don't remember if it was John Cornyn or Ken Paxton. Honestly, whoever did it, but there was an attempt when Talarico was first running to kind of smear him, and it was just funny to see the things that they would throw at his campaign, like that he followed an OnlyFans creator. That was pretty much it. When you have Ken Paxton having mistresses,
multiple,
and he follows one OnlyFans creator, it's just very interesting to see the distinctions there of what might, and not to mention, of course, like truly impeachable things that, indictable things, that Ken Paxton did. So
both for sure.
Yeah, they're saying he's into sexy women, and now their talking point is he's gay.
Yeah. Wait, he's vegan, except he eats giant turkey legs on camera.
Exactly. Yes.
Speaking of which, I did want to return to that, talking about Marlowe's topic from the morning show on KPFT this morning about, where the left and the right can meet, which I think you could take that question and spin it around a little bit too. And in the way that we've been talking about actually at Progress Texas this week, which is sort of trying to send out a little bit of an olive branch to John Cornyn voters. To Republicans who don't want any part of this scoundrel, who were, they were okay with the old scoundrel. The idea that that John Cornyn is now really pretty much the poster child for the demise of the old, Reagan, Bush, McCain version of the Republican Party, which Kathleen, I want to go to that, but I did bring up the fact that barbecue is one of those things, along with football and with chili and whatever else. I mean, all those the big iconic Texas things. Now that the Republicans have brought barbecue into the picture, I'm all about, any opportunity we have to talk to a candidate at a barbecue restaurant, I'm going to be jumping on that. So we'll be doing that for sure. But Kathleen, I did want to have you maybe dissect a little bit for the audience. It is a little bit of a tricky topic. The idea that the old guard Republican Party is now gone. And that what we now know as the Republican Party is kind of a different bunch of people with a different bunch of goals. Explain like we're five, Kathleen. What do we mean when we say the old guard GOP is dead?
So every 2 years, the Republican Party of Texas and the Texas Democratic Party have their state conventions. The delegates from across the state come together in whichever city it is that year, and they vote on the party officers. That's going to happen for Democrats in Corpus Christi. We've covered that a little bit. It's going to happen that we elect the party officers, the party platform, the party rules. The party platform is a huge document that says, these are our values. This is what we believe in. This is the state we all want to live in. Won't you join us if you share these values? So the Republican Party of Texas used to have a party platform. It was wild. It literally said they opposed critical thinking.
Right. Yeah.
So if that doesn't tell you, like, hey, y'all, please don't think about the things that we're saying. Turn your brain off and join us. Since the Trump escalator, basically, Republicans have stopped putting out a party platform. It's basically whatever Donald Trump says is what we're for. And if he's for something one day, we're going to be for that. And if he's against it the very next day, we're going to be against that too. because our party lives and dies by fear of attacks from him. So when we say that the Republican Party of Texas that used to be, the Rick Perry's, the David Dewhurst, back in olden times, Democrats and progressives called David Dewhurst David DeWorst because they were not clever at naming.
Yeah.
But I wish we could go back to those times. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
David Dewhurst and Rick Perry, so mild compared to the Greg Abbotts, the Ken Paxtons, the Dan Patricks, who have just taken our state off a cliff. And now we don't govern anymore in Texas. We have legislative sessions that come together every other year from January to May and focus on where people use the bathroom.
Yes.
And focus on defunding public schools and focus on sending, multi-million dollars to the border for cosplay war, even though immigration is a federal issue. Therefore, Texas is now has the most uninsured adults, has the most uninsured children, has the worst outcomes for teen pregnancy, has the highest repeat teen pregnancy, has the worst education outcomes, if not for Alabama and Mississippi. In so many areas, the public policy is really about what pisses you off and what scares you.
Right.
As a Republican, instead of, I want to make sure that the road that you drive is safe and the bridge that you cross is safe. And like the lights turn on when you go to work, and the air conditioning comes on in the summer when you're home, and the food that you eat is healthy and inspected. And just our daily lives are so impacted by the public policy decisions that are made in Austin and that are made by party leaders, but they don't want you to think about the things that impact your daily life and your kids' lives. They want you to think about whether James Talarico, what he orders in his breakfast taco. Well, that's what we say. That's what we mean when we say the Republican Party, as I grew up in it, just does not exist anymore. And Chris, kudos to you for your video this week about speaking directly to Cornyn voters, because we know there are hundreds of thousands of them who did not want Ken Paxton and who took the time out of their busy lives to go vote in a very short window of time, no weekend voting, and cast that vote. And they don't want Ken Paxton. They don't want more MAGA, more chaos, more corruption. They want just some common sense for their lives and their families.
Yeah, to dissect that just a little bit more, the idea that that Trump's endorsement of Paxton somehow made a huge difference. I'm sure it made some difference. There were definitely some people who might have made a switch in that regard. But Trump was on a roll with a bunch of his endorsed candidates doing well in other states, and this was late in the game. Early voting had already started. The polling was way on Paxton's side. Somebody nudged Trump in the Oval Office there and said, "Hey man, you should kick out a Paxton endorsement, and that would add to your winning streak." And so, like we talked about, that he said he doesn't really care about the midterms. He doesn't really care about Ken Paxton, doesn't care about anybody but himself. So this endorsement was really for Trump, not for Paxton so much. The end result there ends up with two candidates, both of whom were completely kowtowing to Donald Trump as hard as they possibly could. We will never get over the images of John Cornyn, reading Trump's book and talking about naming highways after him, and just the height of ass kissery that will follow that man to his grave, in my book, unless he does something really impressive between now and the end of his term, which of course is at the beginning of January. The distinction for the Republican voter, and we're talking about earlier what Haley said, putting ourselves in the shoes of a Republican voter, and how would that person distinguish between these two candidates who are very different in terms of their track records. John Cornyn, of course, very much more buttoned down and, old guard traditionalist sort of Republican guy, but still totally trying to be part of the Trump machine. Paxton, perhaps a more natural fit because he is a scoundrel, like minds and, birds of a feather and all that stuff with Donald Trump personally. So that to me is the distinction, is the personality, the track record. If you wanted someone who was going to be, let's just say it, a statesman, an elected leader, a politician, as a, in the old guard sort of way of thinking about that, that's John Cornyn. If you're looking for somebody who does not care about running over whoever he's got to run over to get his way, doesn't care about the law, doesn't care about his wife, doesn't care about his ethics, That's Ken Paxton. And so that to me is the internal switch within the mind of the Republican voter. Which of those is the more palatable leader? Do you want the traditionalist leader or do you want the bulldog? And so there are tons of people out there, I'm certain of it, who are going to have a really difficult time having voted for John Cornyn, watching John Cornyn and the old guard Republican Party, of which they probably were a part, go down in flames, and then a few months later turn around and vote for the guy who basically torched the old Republican Party, at least here in Texas. I think there is definitely a sizable opportunity out there for James Talarico to reach out to these people and offer them normalcy and offer them a return to just normal life. Let's be able to afford gas. Let's be able to afford groceries. Let's all those things. And so that is part of that kind of introduction and reintroduction that I think James Talarico is going to have to pull off for the broader electorate out there who don't know much about him yet outside of what they've heard from Ken Paxton or whatever. There's a lot of them that are going to buy that stuff that he's saying. And so Talarico does have an uphill battle here to, show these folks that there is a much brighter opportunity ahead if they vote for James Talarico.
And I'll just point out again, if we're talking about the servant model of leadership where a person is elected and they go make things happen in the legislature, and in Congress, if that's something we're talking about later on too. Our legislative bodies are very inefficient because of gridlock at this point. There were days where bills were passed and public policy and infrastructure was built upon, but that is not where we are today. And so our streets are worse. And so abortion rights are on the line, all of these things all at once. But Talarico was someone who was able to go into our bipartisan Republican majority legislature and as a representative pass bills. As many people who did follow him when he was a state representative know, he has diabetes, and that's a big part of his story. And so he passed a really important bill regarding insulin, capping it at $35, I think is the correct price there. So just common sense legislation that we all yearn for, and yet we're in extremist fascist times.
We've been talking about James Talarico for 24 minutes now, and I could talk about him forever. But I think as we started this conversation, I said, putting yourself in the shoes of a Republican voter. I've been trying to chew on that, throughout this conversation. And I think really what it gets down to is the corruption. I think a lot of Republican voters are kind of drawn to it. I think that there's a certain, brash and brazen openness about a corrupt politician who doesn't really care about getting caught. And I think corruption in politics, corruption in American politics, is something that we are all very painfully aware of. But I think in a roundabout sense, it's more transparent to be corrupt. Do you know what I mean? Because at least you're not hiding it. There's a certain kind of respect there, maybe.
Right.
But I think what James Talarico, he can really differentiate himself is I think this corruption has gotten so normalized that we kind of forget that we, the American people, are supposed to be on the list of priorities for our elected representatives. Like you said, common sense policy. I can see how if a really conservative person is looking at the options between Ken Paxton and James Talarico, that they would vote for Ken Paxton or even Paxton over Cornyn. But I think ultimately where we really need to get back to is just trustworthiness.
Sure.
Regardless of where you stand morally, 20 indictments on the guy is it's not even a case of character. It's how he does his job, and he's bad at it. He's bad at his job, and James Talarico can deliver something for people. And I think that is really going to be something that stands out between the two.
The parallels between Donald Trump and Ken Paxton in terms of, I'm going to coin a word here, scoundrelity. Is that a word? The qualities of being a scoundrel. That's probably not a good word anyway.
I like it.
They're peas in a pod, shall we say. I would throw Beau French in there too. We've learned that Beau French, of course, is now the official nominee by the Texas Republican Party for the Texas Railroad Commission. Folks, especially listening on the radio in Houston, know who John Rosenthal is, and thank God that you do. We'll be talking a little bit more about him. I did want to quickly mention, we don't have a ton of time left here, but a couple of really interesting races that to me speak to the ideas that are out there, at least in the runoff voting base, about generational priorities. And that is the fact that Christian Menifee overwhelmingly defeated Congressman Al Green in that runoff. And of course, Congressman Al Green is one of my favorite guys in the entire Congress. But there is a conversation to be had about age and about that's clearly and tragically borne out not only by the 2 deaths that have occurred in that office, but also the long absence that Governor Abbott was able to take advantage of, and very much Governor Abbott was very much able to hogtie that district with, basically, is what I would say. And then we have a similar race also in Houston, former Houston City Council member and Dr. Letitia Plummer, who ended up scoring the Democratic nomination for Harris County judge against all odds. I mean, there were very much insiders in Houston who were telling us that former Houston Mayor Anise Parker was almost a shoo-in for that race, that they liked Dr. Plummer a lot, but it was pretty much going to go to Anise. It was very, very close. It was, within about 3 points, I believe. But Letitia Plummer, also someone who's younger and, perhaps a little bit more current with the times. So Houston's runoff voters made a really interesting set of impacts moving forward for the fall for the Houston area, for sure, that are going to be really interesting to follow along with.
We have heard from her campaign, and they are crediting Progress Texas as a part of their win. And we sure do appreciate that. We knew it was an all hands on deck. There were a lot of people turning out to vote for Christian Menifee and other important races on the ballot. But the Progress Texas board saw this underdog race and made it public that we supported her and went hard for her campaign. Because of our reporting, the Houston Press put out a story called Harris County Judge's Race is Far From Over. I talked to the reporter on that story. She said she heard my interview with Dr. Plummer and then wrote that story saying that this underdog race is far from over. So these elections matter and endorsements matter, and a lot of organizations do not endorse. This is something that I think is important to help people on a very crowded ballot. Even my runoff ballot in Dallas was lengthy. So I just wanted to share that Dr. Plummer did credit Progress Texas as a part of her win on election night. And congratulations to her and her whole team.
Absolutely. And we honestly, despite the fact that we're on the radio in Houston, we still kind of think of Houston as a bit of a growth area for our organization, where we have a lot longer ties in both Dallas and the Austin area. So our audience is growing really nicely there. And so thanks so much to KPFT for helping us do that. We think that's definitely part of the momentum as well. I wanted to get back to, as we get down towards the end, I'm going to hear about, Tatum's got a field trip to report on here, what Tatum did on her summer vacation. But I did want to backtrack real quick to this idea that certain Republicans are drawn to this outlaw sort of ethos. And that reminds me of something I learned about on a recent trip to Colorado. I actually hung out in a little town called Creed in Colorado that happens to be the place where Bob Ford was killed. Do we know who Bob Ford is? Anybody?
I didn't know the name. Sorry.
Bob Ford was the member of Jesse James's gang who killed Jesse James.
Okay.
It's a really interesting story because Jesse James, at the time of his death, was both the most popular pop culture figure in all of the country, this outlaw gunslinger guy, and was also the FBI's most wanted fugitive. And so Bob Ford was a member of his gang who betrayed him and killed him for a reward from the governor of Missouri, I guess it was, but then became this reviled character. Everybody hated Bob Ford. And so this makes me think of this outlaw sort of angle that I think still very much pervades in Texas, like we're talking about. There are certain elements out there who like Ken Paxton because he is a bit of an outlaw. And so that gets us around to Tatum and her recent trip to Europe, where people have got to have at least a little bit of a romanticized, historically romanticized idea about what Texas is about. And so we want to hear about that. What do they think about us in Texas over across the pond?
I think that's definitely accurate in terms of you got this outlaw cowboy ideal. We were talking before this meeting started about how, when you go abroad, you don't introduce yourself as an American. Certainly not now underneath the Trump administration. Yeah. You introduce yourself as a Texan because there's a distinct cultural identity coming from here that people resonate with and are attracted to, appealed to. So I did that when I visited Spain and Italy to go see my lovely cousin over there across the pond. And I'll just say it was really interesting to hear people's different points of view about my home state. So when I did introduce it, usually it was like their eyes would light up, like, do you ride a horse from over there? There's this one girl who I met in the airport on my way back, actually. She was traveling from Germany to Morocco. Shout out Hiba. She was so nice. And so we got to talking about how this was her second time traveling alone internationally. And when I had mentioned where I was from Texas, she, again, the eyes light up and she pulled her phone out. She showed me a TikTok. She's like, is it like this? And there was maybe a country song on the background. And then it's just images. There's cowboy boots, like dive bars.
Yeah.
And she's scrolling through it, and it's all just these different pieces of iconography about the Southwest. Not even necessarily Texas, but
Cactus and the Big Bend sort of
yes,
thing.
yes,
Right on.
exactly. Yeah, I think like West Texas. And I said, well, there's definitely parts of Texas just like that. And if you ever come visit, you got some friends here. Where isn't it the friendly state? I don't know if it feels like that always, but
Yeah.
I think that there's room to grow off of that sentiment for sure. And I'll finish off with the note that I downloaded a ton of playlists for my trip, and one of them was entitled Primary School Globalism. It's just a very specific aesthetic from the mid 2000s when I was going to elementary school, where multiculturalism was at the forefront of my public education. I think that things are probably different now, noting anti-DEI sentiments. But this was something that I thought would be a fun way to kind of go into a different global area. And so there was like Reading Rainbow was one of the theme songs on there. It was like sea sounds, very interesting kind of things, but it was eye-opening to me to go to all of these different places that invite people from all over the world. Like the Sagrada Familia literally has doors that have the phrase welcome listed in several different languages just to invite people in. And it's just such a stark contrast to where I feel my home state is situated within right now, which is anti-immigrant, despite the fact that that's the foundation of our country. Very xenophobic, very unwelcoming, not friendly state. So I don't know. I have a lot of feelings about it still, but people still like Texans. So there's that.
We're glad you're back, Tatum. When I did my study abroad in Ireland, I was asked if everyone had a horse, just like you're saying. No, I don't have a horse in the backyard, but I do have a backyard. But it's so good to get out of the bubble that is Texas, and then Texas politics, and see the big wide world out there. And if you can afford to travel this summer and you're a young person and you can afford to get out of Texas, get out of Texas and spread those little wings, babies, because there's so much that there is to offer outside of the meanness and the ugliness sometimes that's in our government and our politics, and people who are against pop culture and Super Bowl halftime shows, and just the meanness of it all can be a beatdown.
This is a crazy confession. I hope you guys will forgive me, but I'm actually not from Texas. I'm not from there. Yeah. I was born in Tennessee. I grew up in Georgia until I was a kid. But Texas is my home. And moving here, it is a little bit of a culture shock. There's nothing quite like Texas, but I love it. It is my home. And it's not always the nicest to me. It's not the nicest to my neighbors, but it's worth fighting for. And I hope you guys back home will join us in that.
That's awesome. I never knew that about Haley, and that means that her assimilation has been done completely and smoothly, which is great. That's right. She's not from Texas, but Texas wanted her anyway, and she got here as fast as she could.
She's from Texas, I can tell, as the song goes.
Yeah, all those songs and bumper stickers for sure. I'll close by saying, I'm to an age where, we could choose to leave Texas if we wanted to, and we've talked about it. Our kids went to school in Colorado, and, we traveled to Mexico, and we've messed around different parts of the country, and we've thought about it, but inevitably at the end of any of those trips, I cannot wait to get back to Texas. Texas flows through my blood. And politically, even as uncomfortable and as unpalatable and as intolerable as things get sometimes for progressive Texans, that to me, and I hope for you too, dear listener, and for everybody in the room, galvanizes my efforts to make a change around here, and that's what we're all about. The change will not come without this long, hard fight, and we are all in it, and we hope you are as well. Tatum Owens and Kathleen Thompson and Haley Smith, thank y'all so much, y'all. Progress Texas amplifies progressive values, leaders, and actions. While campaigns come and go, we're the permanent home for progressive media and action in the Lone Star State. Radio listeners, if you missed any of today's electrifying conversation, you're in luck, because it will air again this weekend on KPFT Radio 90.1 FM HD2 on the HD2 channel. It starts at 11 a.m. on Sunday. More information on the radio station at kpft.org. More info on us at Progress Texas at progresstexas.org.